Like I said, we've got Bill Lester, the first African-American driver ever to win a Grand Am race. Bill, welcome to the Odd Couple.
I appreciate it, Chris. How you doing?
We are great. We're excited to have you on. What are your feelings? You retired from NASCAR, correct me if I'm wrong, but in 2006. What
Actually,
are your feelings?
07.
07, I'm sorry. Okay, 2007. So 13 years ago. As you watch these things unfold with Bubba Wallace, the Noose, the reaction of NASCAR, getting rid of the Confederate flag, what are your feelings about all this as you watch it from your special vantage point?
Man, I am elated that this is taking place. It's been far too long, and I'm glad that Bubba took advantage of an opportunity when the country is listening. I mean, not just the country, the world. The Black Lives Matter movement is a worldwide phenomenon, but with regard to what's going on right here in our country, I am elated that NASCAR took a firm stand, made it very clear that the banning of the Confederate flag was something they were going to stand behind, and they were going to support equality. And, that's all we're looking for.
Right.
There have been a lot of people that talk about, well, the Black Lives Matter movement is, black power and black supremacy. No, it's black equality. It's, getting rid of racial profiling and, police injustice and brutality, that sort of thing. So for NASCAR to make the stand that they have made and the statement they have made speaks volumes. It's only the first step. I'm looking forward to seeing what's next.
Bill, I've been to a NASCAR event at Daytona. So can you describe for people what it's like as a driver in that environment and what it's been like and some of the obstacles for drivers of color?
Well, once you're in the garage area, which means you are a driver, you're putting your helmet on, you're going out there and you're taking care of business, it's fine because you're doing what it is that you love to do, that you're skilled and experienced in doing. And if you're good, you have the respect of your competitors. Bubba has the respect of his competitors. That was shown loud and clear even before the start of the race here at Talladega, where they had a unified front, and they brought the 43 car of Richard Petty and Bubba Wallace up front. I thought that was wonderful. The same thing was the case for me when I was racing. Those competitors knew that I was skilled, I was experienced, I could get the job done, I wasn't a hazard or a danger to them on the track. The problem is with some of the old thinking that's out in the grandstand. That's the problem. That's the real issue, and some of those mindsets that need to change. And when you ask me, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and you asked me, why it's not changing. It's because it is so hard to become a professional race car driver, let alone a NASCAR driver. It requires cubic dollars. People don't realize that a annual sponsorship is on the tune of about $18 to $20 million a year. It's a situation where the drivers oftentimes, and most of the times nowadays, have to bring that sponsorship. The team owners are responsible for providing the infrastructure. They bring the crew, they have the facility, the shop, they have the transporters and all that stuff. But when it comes to the operating budget, that often comes from the driver. Unless you're a household name like, Dale Earnhardt Jr. or Jimmy Johnson, whatever. Most of these guys that are coming up through the ranks now, they're paying to play. It's almost like telling LeBron, hey, LeBron, you can jump out of the gym. You got wonderful handles, all that kind of stuff. No, bring $20 million and you can play in the NBA. That's what it's like.
I was going to ask you why there aren't more African-American drivers. You may have just answered it, but are there a lot kind of, I guess, at the lower levels, for lack of a better term, that are trying to get there or are good enough to be there, but they just can't find sponsorship, or what is it?
That is a resounding cry right there, is that I've seen lots of drivers of color that want to be out there, can't afford to do it. The answer that I give in terms of that question is twofold. One, exposure. Second, opportunity. What I mean by exposure is that you have to be exposed to it at a young age. You have to want to be able to participate in it at a young age. Now, how many, black kids are running around able to get into a go-kart and race at the national level in their single-digit years, like 7, 8 years old, with their family paying six figures? It's about a $100,000 proposition to run for a national karting championship, and that's where you cut your teeth in karting. And so you have to do that each year so that you prove that you're the real deal and keep climbing the ladder. before you can become a professional and you move up into, higher horsepower cars and all that sort of stuff. So you have to be exposed to it, and then you have to have the opportunity to be able to do it. And what I mean by that is we need to have equal access to capital. We need to be able to get these companies, corporate America, to come and hear our cry. They have been completely non-receptive. These guys that are typically, the head of diversity and inclusion or, whatever the buzzword is for that budget in the company, they're good for spending a 4, 5, maybe even a 6-figure check. But when it comes to 7 and 8 figures, no, it all of a sudden goes south and the opportunity goes by the wayside.
So do you think that NASCAR is going to use this opportunity to grow the sport and put some money and some programs into socioeconomically disadvantaged kids, getting them into the cars? Because I say if you get more black and brown people into cars, then you're going to have those families at the track, and then they're going to find out, wow, this is really such a dope sport. And then you're going to increase the base, which increases the viewership and all of that, and you can grow the sport.
Well, that's what I'm hopeful and optimistic of. I don't know what NASCAR's plans are. Obviously, banning the flag is just the first step. I've spoken to the president of NASCAR, Steve Phelps, and told him that I was very proud of the fact that NASCAR has made the stand that they have made and banned the flag, and that they are standing behind that decision despite a lot of criticism from their old guard. But I told him, listen, I am there if you need me. Tell me how I can help you guys be successful. And I think that they are trying to get their ducks lined up so that they can come back to me and say, hey, Bill, this is how you can help us. But you're right. I mean, one of the things that absolutely has to happen is that we need to have a winning driver. I think Bubba's doing a great job with the platform that he has, and I'm glad that he, has used it effectively. But he's got to be in a program that wins. You've got to win to bring more of us out there. We like the sport, but we will fall in love with the sport if we can see more of us winning. And Bubba's got a great opportunity because he's the only one at the top level racing right now. But he's got to have the infrastructure. He's got to have the team that can provide him the opportunity to win. Once Bill, that happens, then the floodgates will open.
Bill, real quick, can you explain to people, because, in basketball, it's easy to say, okay, LeBron's the best player or Kevin Durant or Kawhi's the best player, so they should win. Can you explain to them the difference in what the team means in terms of a driver winning versus him just being super talented?
Well, that's a great question because you're absolutely right. Most people think that it's all on the shoulders of the driver to win, and that is not the truth. The fact is these days that these races are virtually won or lost back at the shop. What's going on there is that these cars are being set up at the shop via telemetry and all the tools and technology that sets these cars up. They may all look pretty much the same, but they're not the same. They are minute. There are minute changes and modifications and adjustments that make one car better than the other. Now, of course, the driver has to make the right decision. But the platform is established before the car even hits the track. So you might see now that these cars actually are unloaded without practice and qualifying, and they just go race. Why is that? That's because they already know what these cars are going to do because they're set up back at the shop. And why are some of these cars better set up than others? Again, it all comes down to money. Who's got the best engineers? And that's a function of who has the most budget. Money buys speed.
Bill, we've got a minute left for this answer. So you said when you get in the garage or when you were racing and you got in the garage, it really wasn't an issue with the other drivers. That being the case, were you surprised to hear about that noose being put at Bubba Wallace's area of the garage?
I was absolutely surprised. I was so saddened and disappointed. I'm very convinced, secure in the fact that NASCAR, and I guess I understand the FBI has been, invoked to find out who is responsible for it, and then they will be quickly banned by the sport and never be able to, participate again. But yes, I was extremely disappointed that that's the case. I don't know who did it. NASCAR doesn't know who did it, or at least they haven't announced that. But in this day and age, that is a very disappointing statement to be making, especially when, we're supposed to be coming together as a country. With all the things that we're dealing with the pandemic and such, we don't need that BS, that's for sure.
That's Bill Lester, the first African-American driver ever to win the Grand Am race. Bill, great talking with you. Thanks for your perspective.
I appreciate it, Chris and George. Y'all take care.
Okay, see you. All right, there you have it. We have we just spoke with Bill Lester, the first African-American in NASCAR to win the Grand Am event. And he retired in 2007, so 13 years ago. But we want to talk to him because of the big news of what happened over the weekend in NASCAR, where Bubba Wallace, the only African-American on the tour, in NASCAR, in the series, and there was a noose placed in his garage before, this weekend. And I look, Richard Petty was actually at the Richard Petty garage. He came out and spoke, in no uncertain terms, condemned the act of placing the noose there. NASCAR, which stunned some people a few weeks ago by saying they would get rid of the Confederate flag at their events, is now illegal to have them at their events. They stood behind Bubba Wallace. All of the drivers that we've heard from thus far have stood behind Bubba Wallace. There was one week or two ago, I can't remember his name, a week ago, who retired when they decided they would no longer have the Confederate flag. Who was that, Rob?
I was just saying he was from the truck series, so he wasn't really
the truck
in
series.
the NASCAR series.
Dude, that was such a joke anyway. Oh, I'm retiring at the end of the season, even though this dude in his whole racing career, I don't think he had a top 10. It was going to be real easy to find somebody to finish
really
last place. Yeah, to finish in last place every week in the truck series.
But, and Bill Lester, George, kind of seconded, or at least what we've seen. Like I said, all the drivers, we saw today, Rob G, what they do before the race. They did some type of tribute kind of, or show of support.
They helped push his car to the front of the track so that every racer and everyone in the garage was all walking either beside his car or behind it.
Right. And it was at Talladega. He finished 14th. That just finished a little while ago. He was 14th. But so he's gotten the support. And Bill Lester said that that didn't surprise him, because he felt like even when he was in NASCAR, which again was, 20 to 10, 15 years ago, he said that the drivers were not the problem. It was just certain segments of fans. Here he is.
And if you're good, you have the respect of your competitors. Bubba has the respect of his competitors. That was shown loud and clear even before the start of the race here at Talladega, where they had a unified front, and they brought the 43 car of Richard Petty and Bubba Wallace up front. I thought that was wonderful. The same thing was the case for me when I was racing. Those competitors knew that I was skilled, I was experienced, I could get the job done, I wasn't a hazard or a danger to them on the track. The problem is with some of the old thinking that's out in the grandstand. That's the problem. That's the real issue, and some of those mindsets that need to change.
Well, and George, you saw that there was someone that flew. There was a plane, right, that flew over the race this weekend with a Confederate, or over the track with a Confederate flag. There was something like that, and then a lot of fans on the outside of the track had the Confederate flag outside of their cars and stuff. But go ahead and share your thoughts, George.
Yeah, and so I think that, Chris, that we have to deal with the elephant in the room at first, which is I saw the majority of the reaction to Bubba Wallace and finding the noose in his garage to be extremely supportive of him and all of that. But you did have a segment of the population saying, this is a setup. There's no way that this happened. Who would do that? That's unbelievable. And I heard that. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, you're talking about the same people that are flying Confederate flags all over the place. And the thing that I found telling about the Confederate flags is this. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, grew up there till I was 9 years old. Then we moved out to California. And my first experience with the Confederate flag, I was, 5, 6 years old. I was riding in the car with either my aunt or my cousin. and two guys pulled up in a pickup truck with Confederate flags on the back, and they're yelling out the car at me, a little kid, N-word, 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 N-word. Wow. And I was just like, and from that moment on, I knew, like, if people are associated with this flag, no. Like, stay away from them because that is a danger zone. But here is, Chris, that the thing that I've learned, though, is that, and I think that this is what's hard for some people surrounding the Confederate flag, is yes, there are some people who are truly racist that are, that love and support this flag, even though it's a flag of losers and treason. There's also people who connect with it with their youth and their childhood, and they say, oh, I remember my grandfather, my granddad, and that these were great times. And it's hard for them to really realize, hold up, that they were great and nice to me, but out in the world, they were outside scumbag human beings treating people terribly. So I think that is what's hard for people to wrestle with. They're like, he's such a good guy to everybody around him. How could he do this? Like, there has to be something more to it. So I think that's hard for people as well.
Yeah, and I agree. And maybe I'm sure everybody that likes the flag or liked it at one point, a lot of them don't identify with the negative that comes with that flag. They're just, as you said, kind of doing it. It's tradition and all that. But you have to realize that tradition, we can say harmed people. I think that's putting it mildly. That tradition is about enslaving people based on the color of their skin and all of the treachery that went with slavery. I mean, slavery, look, because I've heard some whites try to sugarcoat it as, it was just a blind spot in American history and all. No, first of all, slavery built the nation. The wealth of this country was built on it. The sugar crops, the cotton industry, the rice industry, all of that, tobacco, all of that was from slavery. And that's what made America a superpower. And not to mention castration, lynching, whipping, rape, all of that stuff was selling children away from their families. Imagine that. Selling children away from their families, selling wives away from their husbands, husbands away from their wives. All of that was a part of slavery. And so even if you identify with that flag because your grandfather had it, your father had it, and as far as you know, they were great people to you, that history has to go. And you should be willing to accept that. And the fact is that a lot of people can't accept that. But part of the problem, George, is many Americans don't know the true history of the country. They really don't, because we're taught a very sanitized, let's just keep it real, white version of American history, and you don't learn a lot about, the true history and what went on in America. And that's why a lot of people are stunned by the reaction of African Americans and stunned that when we hear "Make America Great Again," we get offended because we're like, well, was it great when we were in slavery or Jim Crow or what? And so that is where I think as we're changing symbols and, images and all this stuff, the textbooks need to be updated. The textbooks need to be fixed so that Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, all children who've grown up in America learn the true history. And I think that would help to, quell a lot of this racism. But, a lot of people don't want to give. So let's keep it real. I said it last week. Some people still, they want white superiority. They don't want equality. They don't want racial equality. They want the superior position that whites have been in for 400 years in this land. And so they are bucking against that because they see that crumbling, and that is what they are trying to hold on to. George, I said this on First Things First this morning, that look, and because we led off this segment talking about whites, the drivers and Bill Lester and all, that there was support from Richard Petty and all the drivers. But the fans that Bill Lester said were really the challenge in NASCAR, your average fan isn't allowed in the garage. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rob G.
No.
Those are drivers, people affiliated with the teams, and that's where the Noose was found. And so somebody affiliated with a driver or a car or something, put that in there. And I don't believe they acted alone. I don't know this for a fact, but my belief is that they probably told people. They may have joked about it with people. And my challenge is to whites who really want to get rid of racism, move past that in our country, and who want racial equality. When you're in private with whites, and it's all whites talking about race, or, it comes up, somebody cracks a dirty joke or about blacks, or, use the N-word or whatever. That's when you need to speak out about it. Because whites will speak out about it publicly, but privately in those conversations. Because look, George, there were times growing up when I was be around whites as a kid, and some of them, they wouldn't know I was black. And they'd speak disparagingly about blacks or use the N-word. And I'm not that old, you know what I mean? And so this is not something that's just for 70 and 80-year-olds and people that are about to die off or just in the South. This is still a part of American society. So I would challenge whites that when you're in private and with all whites and you see racist stuff being said or whatever, I'm not saying it happens all the time, but when it does happen, you need to call it out. Because if somebody had called out whoever did this and said, no, you cannot do that. If you do that, I'm done with you or whatever, this may not have happened.
I think it's important. I agree with you there, Chris, that you do have to call it out in private. But on a side note, too, I think that in this cancel culture that we have, wanting to get rid of everybody and all of this stuff when they've done something wrong with the expectation of perfection,
right.
I do think that we have to have some grace for people who change. Because
Agreed.
There are people who grew up a certain way, were taught certain things, and that's how they acted out in the world. But then they've seen differently. Quick story, Chris. I went to the University of Oregon. There is a guy who I played football with who I won't even say his class because it'll be too easy to figure out. He came from a big city too, and a diverse state. And when I think it was our third year there, so my redshirt sophomore year, we were sitting in the locker room and it was just me and him around. And he was like, George, man, I cannot believe that like the people that I was around when I was younger, they told me so many lies. I was like, what are you talking about? He was like, I was around a lot of Aryan nations, skinheads, all of this. And I'm like, in that part of town? Are you kidding me? And I didn't even know that they were there prevalent like that. And he was like, yeah, man. And he was like, yeah, they told me that all people of color, black people, Mexicans, all this, we're just terrible people beneath us, all of this. And that they were bad people, inherently bad and violent and all these things. He said, I got to college and with that thinking. And then I realized that there are two types of people. There are good people and there are bad people. And those things that I was taught about black people, I've seen that they weren't true. And so I asked him the ultimate question. I said, all right, so if this is what you truly believe and what you've been taught, because he just brought this up to me out of the blue. So he was really speaking from his heart. Right. I said, so would it be okay if, obviously age appropriate, if one of the guys from the team or me married your daughter? His response was very honest, which I appreciated. He said, honestly, I would prefer that she married a white guy only because it would make it easier with my family and the community. But if the dude was a good dude, treated her right, I would accept it and fight anybody for him, because if he treats my daughter right, that's ultimately all that matters, because I've seen a bunch of dudes out here in college that look like me that are jerks. So that's ultimately right. The only thing that mattered. And yes, if you dug up in his past, he probably said the N-word, probably said some very bad
right.
things, but his growth was the most important thing. And so I would not cancel him.
Well, and where I agree, I mean, it was a great story. That's a great story of change and redemption. And I agree, like, this cancel culture is terrible because it gives nobody a room to make a mistake. And I guarantee you, every one of these people tweeting about canceling people and all that, they've made mistakes in their life too. You know what I mean? If we really went through there, we wouldn't even have to dig too deep to see them make mistakes, make egregious comments and things like that, because humans make mistakes. And so I totally agree. Cancel culture that's got to be canceled, because you have to allow people they're allowed to make mistakes, and they're allowed to grow. And as your story shows, and many people's story shows, people do change, whether they change from racism, whether they change for something else. And that's what cancel culture does not allow. And so I'm all for canceling cancel culture. So that's a good story, George. I appreciate that. I just wanted to say this too, George. I think for us to really, one of the steps to getting past this racial issue in America is that we have to be able to have open and honest conversations. And that if we're going to have open and honest ones, it's going to, both parties, let's say between blacks and whites, we both have to be willing to be offended. So if I say something, I'm in a conversation with a white person that's transparent, and I say something about American history, they might be offended, but they have to be willing to do that. And if they say somebody says, well, what about, all the kids being born out of wedlock and the dads aren't around? I don't need to just write them, that's racist, and I'm storming out of the room. We have to be able to be offended and have a real conversation, because this is a serious issue and it's a sensitive issue. And so I think to have, true conversations about this, you can't just cancel somebody right off the bat if they really want to learn and really are trying to learn. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But let's get to the calls. 877-99 on Fox, 877-996-6369.
Nick in KC, what you got to say, man?
Gents, thank you. I appreciate you guys taking my call. I just wanted to weigh in on the cancel culture. I really feel that in today's day and age, when people get canceled, when they make stupid comments on Facebook that are deemed to be racial and whatnot, that almost helps the growth of the person. Because honestly, unless you're getting in trouble for something that you're doing and you are experiencing the backlash from the decisions that you make, everything we do in life has a consequence or a result. And honestly, getting canceled for some people is that wake-up call that they can't be this way anymore, at least being open about it on a social platform. So,
that's a good point. And I think the thing that makes it challenging, and you said if you put it out there publicly, you get chastised publicly. But I do think people need to be called out for things they've done. That's kind of what I was saying, like whites doing it privately. The thing with cancel culture is it's done obviously on a national platform, and people may be written off forever, like they can never change. But if they put the comment out there publicly on Twitter or something, then those are going to be the circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree that chastisement, that just because you are forgiven or have grace, that doesn't make you free from consequences. So I think that there's a difference in that. But I do think that there should be a path back for people who say, well, you know what? I admit I was wrong. Here is where I was wrong at, and here is what I've done and the steps I've taken to be better. I mean, it's almost like when people are in, because I was talking to Daryl Strawberry on the thing with our pastor not too long ago, and he was talking about how in his past, and his drug addiction and all the other stuff that he's gone through has allowed him to reach so many more people, because it's hard for sometimes people who've gone through things to really accept or really hear the message from somebody who hasn't been through that sort of trial and tribulation. So I think that it is important for those people who really have changed to come back and teach people, like, hold up, like I thought that same way, but then I learned X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, wow, like I didn't even see it, and what I was being taught was a lie. Right.
Good point.
Jeff in Florida, what you got, bro?
Guys, I really liked Chris's point about how we're teaching history. And I think it's really interesting, especially when it comes to like foundation of the country and things like that. One of the things that's really hard is like when you do understand the history of slavery and things like that, and it being kind of taught in like this was a United States problem. It's really hard because it wasn't wholly a United States problem. One of the things that I've kind of has really shocked me is that Saudi Arabia had slavery up until like the 1960s before it was abolished, and that was majority black people, and so it's really hard to understand. Yes, slavery is the most atrocious thing about the foundation of the United States. However, it is not wholly the whole slavery racism problem is not unique to the United States.
No, slavery's taking place in all over the world. There was slavery in Africa, and there may even be over in the east part of Africa. It's still today, if I'm not mistaken, Sudan. But yeah, that's an interesting point.